Good afternoon, everyone. I am Kabiri Dotto from the Department of Zoology, Sarojini Naidu College for Women, Kolkata. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the national webinar on exploring the different aspects of nature conservation. Today is the World Nature Conservation Day, and I am sure we all realize that conservation of nature and natural resources is of paramount importance because it has large implications for food security, clean water availability, preventing natural disasters and pandemics, and keeping global warming as well as climate change at abeyance. In short, our very survival and well being depends on it. Therefore, what better day than today to explore the different dimensions by which nature can be conserved? With that being said, let us begin the program. Our Honorable Principal, Dr. Urmila Okil, will be delivering the welcome address to all of you. Unfortunately, she could not be here in person today. However, she has kindly sent us her recorded message will be played to you now. Tomogno, please play the message.
Good evening, everybody. Respected speakers, my dear colleagues, and my beloved students. On behalf of Sarojini Naidu College for Women, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome all of you to this national level webinar on exploring the different aspects of nature conservation, organized by the Department of Zoology and IQSC of Sarojini Naidu College for Women. I express my gratitude to the respected speakers, Sri Ogni Mitro, Deputy Director, Eastern Region, Wildlife Crime Control Bureau, and Dr. Sandip Pal, Assistant Professor, Department of Zoology, Barakpur Rashtraguru Surendranath College, and thank them for sharing their valuable experiences in their respective fields. I thank all the members of the Department of Zoology and the IQAC team of our college for organizing this webinar. Today, on the occasion of World Nature Conservation Day, it is time for all of us to take stock of what we have done to the natural world in our bid to advance human civilization. If the series of natural and man-made disasters are any indication, then we may expect future Earth and Mother Nature to treat us just as we do it now with reckless abandon. Therefore, it is imperative to concentrate our efforts towards a careful preservation and protection of nature and natural resources and rebuilding what we have worn down. Our not so distant future depends upon it. To that effect, it is pertinent to know all the aspects of nature conservation and how it is brought about so that we may do our bit. With this intention, we have organized this webinar so that all of us may be well informed about this subject. I believe that we will be greatly enriched by the deliberations of our learned speakers. I wish this webinar to be a great success and wish you all enjoy this webinar. I thank the respected speakers for their valuable time. I thank all the participants for being present here today with us. Thank you all once again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for those gracious wishes. Thank you. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Shantana Chakraborty, Coordinator IQAC of the college, to share her thoughts with you.
Good evening, everyone. On the occasion of World Nature Conservation Day, the Department of Geology and IQAC of Sarojini Naidu College for Women are organizing a national webinar on exploring the different aspects of nature conservation. We are privileged to have with us today eminent speakers Mr. Ogni Mitru and Dr. Sandeep Pal. I extend my warm welcome to them and Principal Madam Dr. Urmila Ukil, my colleagues, our students and everyone attending the webinar. So I won't take too much of your time and directly pass on the mic to Kaveri so that the session for today's evening can begin. Eagerly waiting to be enriched by the discussions today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, madam, for all your support. Thank you. Now, I would like to invite our respected head of the department, Dr. Mala Bose, to share her thoughts with you.
Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all to the national webinar exploring the different aspects of nature conservation on the occasion of World Nature Conservation Day. We are very pleased to have with us two great speakers, Mr. Ogni Mitro and Dr. Sandeep Pal. A very warm welcome to both of you, Mr. Mitro and Dr. Pal. My heartiest welcome to our Principal Madam Dr. Urmila Okil and IQAC Coordinator Dr. Shantana Chakraborty. All of us who are gathered here today are extremely grateful for the opportunity to share our thoughts on the nature conservation topic.
So it seems ma'am got disconnected as she was speaking from a very remote area. So she has to visit some forest for her work. So without delaying, so let me just introduce our first speaker, Shri Agni Mitra, to all of you. So it is my great privilege to know him for a very long time. So since his very early days, I know that he was very passionate about conservation and nature. It's indeed wonderful that finally he has been able to take that up as a profession. So to tell you very briefly, at present he is the Regional Deputy Director of the Eastern Region of the Wildlife Crime Control Bureau. That comes under the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change of the Government of India. So since 2016 he has been working in this post. And before that, as an IFS officer, as a official of the Indian Forest Service, he had been serving in the Andaman and Nicobar area. So he was the Deputy Conservator of Forest of the Andaman and Nicobar administration. And then prior to that, he was the Deputy Conservation of Forest of the Mill Division. And then he was also before that, he was also the Divisional Forest Officer of the Nicobar Division. Prior to that, he also did some work for the Worldwide Fund for Nature as an assistant coordinator for the Terra Yak Landscape Program. And then he has also worked as a research fellow at the Wildlife Institute of India in Dehradun. So he has received numerous awards and honors. So it's a really long list. So most notable among them is that he received the award for the first position in the Indian Forest Service training course. And he has participated in various national and international level workshops. So most notable among them being the sectoral level meetings between India and Myanmar civilian border authorities in 2019, and then he was also participated in a workshop on the Asian regional meeting on wildlife crime by Interpol, also in 2019. In 2018, he has participated in another workshop by Interpol on cyber-enabled wildlife crime. Yes, another workshop is participated in is training on wildlife crime control and detection techniques. So without going into much details about these various workshops he has conducted and attended, so you can easily understand that he has been working at the forefront of wildlife crime prevention and control. So he's basically started his career as a zoologist, and then his BSc was in zoology from Presidency College. So that's the time since when I know him. And then his master's was in environment from FRI, Forest Research Institute in Dehradun. After that, he went into the Indian Forest Service. So he is also interested in writing popular articles and he's interested in photography. I know him as a very active and avid orchid grower. So he is interested in various aspects of nature, basically. So without wasting much time, so I directly hand over to Ogni for starting his talk.
Thank you, Dr. Anuradha Mitra, for kind words. It's not a very long list of awards, actually. Anyway, so as all of you are aware, today's topic would be wildlife conservation scenario in India. So if I'm audible to everybody, then I can start. Am I?
Yes, sir, you're audible and visible.
Okay. Right. So is the slide visible?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
It's visible, right. So today we are going to talk about wildlife conservation in India, recent trends, and some aspects of wildlife crime. So we are going to cover little bit on the wildlife conservation efforts in India. Who are the stakeholders? What are the threats to wildlife crime? The threats to Indian wildlife. That is threats to wildlife conservation. And then a short introduction to what is wildlife crime, the major species that are in threat, and wildlife crime issues in West Bengal particularly, and the role of citizens, you and me, who are not forest officers or police officers. How can we contribute to the fight against wildlife crime? So if we look at the efforts of wildlife crime prevention and mitigation, so the primary one from which everything flows is the articles of the Constitution. In Article 48A, where the Constitution is directing the state regarding various welfare principles, there in 48A, the Constitution says that the state shall endeavor to protect and improve the environment and to safeguard the forest and wildlife of the country. So this makes it imperative on the state to frame laws and to conserve wildlife within India as best as it can. Further, in Article 51AG, in which the Constitution is describing the fundamental duties of every Indian citizen, it says that it shall be the duty of every citizen of India to protect and improve the natural environment, including forest, lakes, rivers, and wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures. I always find it mesmerizing that the Constitution enshrines upon every Indian the duty to have compassion for living creatures. It's a very special provision. Something similar is not there in the Constitution of most countries, as far as I am aware. So it's a very special provision which asks upon every Indian as a fundamental duty to have compassion for living creatures. So from these provisions flows our different laws and acts which protects the wildlife within India. Majorly, you can see almost 90% of the protection flows from the Wildlife Protection Act. Okay, smuggling of Indian wildlife articles, etc., is prevented by the Customs Act, and there are other acts like the Indian Forest Act, which protects the habitat of the wildlife, forest acts of state governments in some states, and then constitutional provisions, as we have discussed, and there are some supportive provisions in other acts like the Indian Penal Code, Forest Conservation Act, Environment Protection Act, Biological Diversity Act, money laundering, prevention of cruelty to animals, etc. But as I said, the bulk of the protection is afforded by the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. Now, what does the Wildlife Protection Act says and what are the major conservation efforts in India today? Basically, the major provision of the Wildlife Protection Act is to establish protected areas for conservation of endangered wildlife. As I mean, in July 2019, okay, so I don't think there has been much change of addition or deletion of wildlife sanctuaries, national parks after that. We have had more than 550 wildlife sanctuaries in India, more than 100 national parks, and then the newer category of protected areas, conservation reserves and community reserves, 88 and 127 respectively. Okay, and as you can see, there are hotspots where there is a lot of wildlife, there is a lot of diversity, like northeast, like the Western Ghats, like the forested areas of central India or Terai Arc. You can see a lot of protected areas, and then there are large swaths of land which is almost devoid of protected areas. Coming to the state, we have 6 national parks and about 15 wildlife sanctuaries here, and most of it is in North Bengal with the exception of Sundarbans in south. Now, in this talk, I'm presuming that you have a basic idea of what wildlife is, what kind of protection it requires in forests, okay? So we would mostly talk about the recent issues in conservation. So if you have any doubt, any clarification that you want, you can write it in the chat box, and after my presentation is over, we can discuss over the questions, or after the presentation is over, you can ask me directly also, and we would love to discuss any clarification that you would like to have. But the presentation would mostly concentrate on the current aspects of wildlife conservation, not exactly the theoretical basis of conservation, which I suppose as college students you will have some idea about. So protected area we have just discussed by the Wildlife Protection Act. You can have national parks, wildlife sanctuary, conservation reserves, community reserves, and also tiger reserves. Earlier they were management categories, now they have a legal sanctity as a legally bound entity. As we will see. In conservation reserve, it is a government-owned land on which conservation activities are proposed. Generally, these are adjacent to national parks and sanctuaries. There will be consultations with local communities. There will be management representative from the forest department, from the local communities, and it will be jointly managed. This is done because these lands, which are adjacent to national parks and sanctuaries, cannot have industries, cannot have any polluting land use patterns. So what you are left with is tourism. It has immense potential because it is just next to the wildlife rich areas, and other non-polluting activities like agriculture, horticulture, etc. So to manage the tourism, to manage the tourism revenue properly, to ensure equitable distribution, that is the main idea of establishing these conservation reserves. It is also a buffer between the national park and the more heavily industrialized areas, so that there is some areas where there is wildlife movement, but there is no resident wildlife. There is non-polluting use of land, so that the wildlife feels comfortable coming till that area before they have to go back into the forest and protect the areas again. So that's why conservation reserves are established, to give a buffer to national parks and wildlife sanctuaries. It is jointly managed by the local people and by the forest department, and generally aimed at generating ecotourism revenue and equitable distribution of the ecotourism revenue, besides, of course, conservation of the wildlife that is already there. So these are necessarily government-owned land. If similar projects and similar management practices are to be done on privately owned or community-owned land, then it is called a community reserve. Rest everything is same. It is just that it is community or privately owned land. It is beside wildlife protected areas, National Park or Wildlife Sanctuary. It is established with the dual ideal of having a buffer and having tourism revenues, possibly equitable distribution of that. So all those things similar. Only the difference is that it is community owned or privately owned, while conservation reserves are government owned lands. Nagaland is a case in point in this. Nagaland, as we are aware, is a state in northeastern India which has been famous for its hunting practices, and it is almost considered a tradition to hunt in Nagaland. And it is not only done in the name of tradition, it is also done for amusement at some times. So, in such a scenario where most of the forest is community owned, contrary to the scenario in West Bengal or most parts of India, the forests are not government owned in Nagaland. So, community owned forest, there is a tradition of hunting practices. How do you counter that? Turns out that community reserves are a great way. And that is because for the management of community reserves, you have to recruit local people, you have to build certain structures to conserve the water levels in those areas, which in turn benefits the villages also. Downstream, nearby, the villages get employment, the villages get water, the villages can have something like fodder, grasses, driftwood, firewood, etc. So it is something which is a win-win for everybody. The wildlife flourishes because there is no hunting, the area is protected, and the people get employment, get funds for management of that area, so people are also happy. They get some NTFPs, non-timber forest produce, they get some timber, etc. So it is a win-win situation for everybody. And that is why from 2013, basically 2014 to 2020, the area under community reserves in Nagaland has risen from 250 square kilometer to almost 1,000 square kilometer. And from a number of just one in the most part until 2014, the number has risen to almost 100 now in Nagaland itself, 100 community reserves. So this is community owned and community, so to speak, sponsored conservation. This is something which is very, very good model for similar situations in other northeastern states, other tribal areas, where the people and the wildlife both win. Other things which are very important issues for wildlife conservation today is, first of all, the awareness that wildlife and forest are necessary components of a dignified life. We cannot really live without forests because they are the carbon sinks, and the ecotourism benefits, the ecotourism revenue that is associated with it. So for that, you will have to understand tiger tourism. From the 80s till date, central India, parts of North India has been very heavy on tiger tourism, and tigers like Sita here, photographed by Michael Nichols, National Geographic photographer in Bandhavgarh in the late 80s, and other tigresses and tigers like her, who has graced the tourism zones of our different tiger reserves. Virtually, they have been employing thousands of people around those areas. If you imagine a scene like this is from Corbett Tiger Reserves in Uttarakhand. The gypsies that you see are chock-a-block full of tourists. The gypsies are driven by people who are local. They're deriving their income from these tourism activities. Each of these gypsies have nature guides who are also local. The tourists, they're staying at hotels, sometimes owned by locals, sometimes owned by outside hotel chains. Those hotels employ another set of cooks, boys, receptionists, etc. They are buying supplies from the farmers around. They have an industry of electrician and maintenance, etc., which are employing, giving tertiary employment to a lot of big base of people around the tiger reserve. So effectively speaking, the few tigers of the tourism zone of Tikala of Corbett Tiger Reserve is employing thousands of people, if not more, primarily, directly, indirectly, they're employing many, many more. So that is the economic value of a tiger. That is the ecotourism revenue that a tiger can generate, a charismatic wildlife species can generate. It is not the sum of its parts. If you look at the illegal value of tiger body parts, they will never sum up to the crores of rupees this tiger will earn as revenue, being there alive and doing what ecologically was intended for it as a species, as a wild tiger. So we must understand this, that our wildlife in India is more valuable, even directly economically more valuable. Forget about the ecological values and the ecological services of the forest that they inhabit. They are directly economically more valuable being alive. Okay, we need to understand that, and that is the crux of wildlife conservation in the ground today in India. More pictures from Corbett. So from this discussion, I think you have understood who are the main stakeholders of wildlife conservation. The two main stakeholders are the state forest departments of different states and the forest fringe dwellers, people who are residing around these wildlife habitats. They're sometimes antagonistic, they're sometimes friendly to each other, really depends upon the management and the issues and how they have been moved over time. The other stakeholders would be the Government of India, uh, in agencies like the ministry, which frames the policies, disperses the funds, etc., for these activities, conservation activities, and bodies like the National Tiger Conservation Authority or the Wildlife Crime Control Bureau, who gives a lot of thought to framing the policies, giving the funds to the state forest departments, and then framing research questions also at times, where the field activities and the field research is conducted. That brings us to the next group of stakeholders, the researchers. They have been in India, they have been working very, very well, and we really have very good science-based conservation, especially for larger much well established for lesser known species. But for the charismatic wildlife, we really have a good base of science. And the Wildlife Institute of India has been leading that, but there are other institutes, both government and private, which has produced excellent research on wildlife. And that is why they have been able to really direct the flow of conservation efforts towards the best practices. And as a result, our wildlife is still quite safe. And of course, we have discussed about the tourism sector because they earn a lot from wildlife conservation. They are the major stakeholders. And the most negative group is, of course, the poachers or timber mafia, who sometimes are a part of the local forest fringe dwellers. Sometimes they are not. They might have just have a brush with tourism sector. And of course, they are the most negative impact on wildlife conservation. But if you have good local support, if the forest fringe dwellers are overwhelmingly in favor of wildlife conservation because they derive economic benefits from it, I think the poachers or the timber mafia will not be able to have a proper toehold in the wildlife habitat, in any wildlife habitat for that matter. So these are the primary stakeholders in wildlife conservation in India today. If you have some other sector in mind or some other name in mind, we can discuss that. Right. Coming to conservation challenges in India, first and foremost, of course, the humongous population pressure. India has about 2% of the world's area, but houses about 17% of the world's population and about 17% of the world's cattle. You can imagine what kind of enormous biotic pressure that is on Indian forest. And so this is a kind of tiger habitat and original vegetation map about 100 years ago. And it is, the brown is suboptimal habitat, the shades of green is optimal habitat. But if you look at it today, there has been a rapid increase in global population post 1800s. So with the advent of medical science, the human population growth has just shot up like anything. It is through the charts. It is actually through this chart. If you plot it, almost it is going through the chart right now. However, at the same breath, let me also add that the population growth rate, the rate of growth, is supposed to be declining, is expected to decline over time. And if the population growth rate decline, the population does not decline. There is still some growth, okay? But since the growth rate is declining, the rate of growth of population that declines. So the population grows more slowly, and it is expected that maybe another 80, 100 years from now, we can have a stable population of humans. But we are not sure if that will be too late. So because of that kind of humongous population growth, this is kind of the current availability of tiger habitat and wildlife habitat across India. It is still 23%, and to the astonishment of everybody, let me say that forest cover is actually increasing in India for the past 10 plus years. If you look at the state of the forest uh, report released by the Forest Survey of India biennially, the forest cover is actually increasing, which is an incredible amount of achievement given the amount of human and biotic pressure that is there in India. However, at the same breath, let me also say that the best quality of forest, that is the highest density of forest, very dense forest with over 40% of canopy density, those forests are decreasing. That's a grave matter of concern. However, the overall forest cover is increasing. That's a very, very heartening fact for all of us. But due to the rapid decline of forest, till about 20 years back, we have lost the cheetah, we have lost the bunting from India, and there are many species which are occurring only as a single population, like the lions in Gir, or the hangul in Dachigam National Park, or the true wild buffaloes of Udanti Sitanadi Sanctuary of Chhattisgarh. Other challenges in India are, of course, destruction of habitat. I will just elaborate on what that is. Fragmentation and degradation of habitats, poaching for wildlife, human-wildlife conflicts, and poverty. Poverty is something which is crushing our poorest strata of people. It is also crushing the forest and the forest resources, because the poorest people are the ones who are most dependent upon natural resources. They are not able to manipulate the natural resources to their best interest, and they're dependent upon the natural interest, and their exploitation turns into over exploitation and then degrades the very resource on which they're dependent upon, and their cycle of poverty continues. So that is a very evil spiral, which is something that would need concerted government and non-government effort to get out of. So some examples of different types of forest conservation challenges. So this is forest degradation. So this is shifting or jhum cultivation in northeastern states. Many of the northeastern states, we have shifting cultivation, and you can see large swaths of forest burnt down, and they would grow crops for a few seasons till the soil will be fertile, and thereafter, once the soils are no more fertile, they would abandon that land, go into some other area, and do this slash and burn cultivation. Things were still okay if the slash and burn cultivation periods were 25 years or more, so that you are cultivating an area, then abandoning it, and then again coming back to that area after 25 years. So in that space, in that time, the place would reacquire its vegetation, reacquire its biodiversity, and would be a natural healthy forest. Yes, it would be cut down again, but only in a fraction of the area that will be done. So most of the area would still have the ecological functioning of a normal forest. But with more and more population, the zoom cycles have been um, shortened. So people are now coming back to the same area after 5 or 6 years, which would mean that the area does not have enough time to recuperate, does not have the essential nutrients. This is leading to poor productivity of crops on one hand, and destruction of the habitat and degradation of forest on the other hand. Firewood cutting, it's also something which is very, very rampant around forest areas, not only for bona fide domestic use, also for commercial use, like in this dhaba. and it is something which is degrading our forest every day. Examples of forest fragmentation include this 30-kilometer long canal, which is very difficult to cross for even elephants. So other animals like deers and the tiger, etc., would find it very difficult to cross. You can see a bridge in the middle of the photo, but that kind of bridge is not natural and would be very difficult for animals to cross through that open single bridge. And this is how populations of elephants or deers or any other wildlife on one side of the canal will have to remain on that side of the canal. The other population would remain on the other side, and there would be genetic drift, and there would be different populations, and there would be sometimes will be inadequate to maintain a population. There will be gradual extinction, gradual inbreeding issues, and all that. So that is why fragmentation is something which looks pretty innocuous, but ultimately it really leads to weak populations who are then in a threat of extinction, uh, who cannot withstand then the pressures of different kinds. Control of poaching is also something that is a national priority already, but there are two types of poaching and hunting. One is the poaching for pot by local people. It is not the organized type, so it's still somewhat better, but still it is a punishable act and should be dealt accordingly. The important factor at places is conflict. Roadkills are, of course, a very classic example of use of a space which both the species have to use. So, generally, wildlife is the loser, like in this case. And other forms of conflict can be child lifting by leopards, crop raiding, which would generally result into ending of life for that criminal animal. Any leopards or tigers who have become man-eaters will generally be eliminated. Leopards or tigers, they uh, rarely become man-eaters, but as soon as that happens, they will be eliminated. Crop raiders, wild bulls, deers, etc., will also be eliminated, sometimes unceremoniously. So these kind of conflict activities are also taking a toll on wildlife, especially the large cats, the larger charismatic wildlife. As we had discussed this poverty issue is something that is really crushing. These people that you see are in the Doon Valley area, and they have been collecting hovergrass from the Rajaji National Park area for generations. So this is a crucial resource for them for thatching their roofs, for selling and getting something in exchange. However, because of this, the hills are denuded. As you can see in your background, there is a lot of extraction of grass, which is otherwise fodder for elephants, for other wild herbivores. So that conflict situation is already there, and because of this, the wildlife will be generally the loser, the on the losing side. Like this, wild herbivores and domestic herbivores grazing close by is never a good idea. Domestic herbivores can pass on many infectious agents to wild herbivores. So that is why there are um, inoculation programs for all tiger reserves, where all the cattle which is in and around the tiger reserves, they are vaccinated. So that is something that is essential to do to protect the wild herbivores from exposure of domestic pathogens and etc. carried by the domestic herbivores. So even after so many problems, we still have wildlife, and why is that? One very big reason is the hunting reserves of former kings. Please give me a minute. Thank you. So the hunting reserves of the former princely states have been mostly converted into protected areas, national parks, and wildlife sanctuaries. These national parks and sanctuaries are now the source populations of our charismatic wildlife. The British had brought with themselves scientific forestry. They had thought that they are not going to leave, so they have established this reserve forest system mostly for continued supply of timber to the railways as railway sleepers, to other functions in the railways, to the interior paneling of the Royal Navy or the buildings back in England. So they had tried to ensure a steady supply of wood, and that is why they had reserved blocks of forest to be cut down only after 10 years from the date it was operated, something like that. That would also mean that there's a lot of refuge of wildlife in those reserve forests, and because of that, he could, uh, besides extracting timber, those also became safe haven for some of our wildlife. The British also established the protected areas from the reserves of former kings to national parks, wildlife sanctuary, etc. Culturally speaking, we Indians believe in living and let living, live and let live. While most of the northern Indian population are vegetarian, rest of India is not so much. However, still the compassion of living creatures for living creatures and the willingness to share this planet with other living creatures is very much there, almost in all Indians. And as I have already discussed, we have excellent wildlife scientists and also other conservationists, and their untiring efforts to um, educate us with the actual truth so that we can take appropriate decisions regarding conservation of wildlife is always there. And that is why we have been able to double tiger numbers in the last 14 years, despite the kind of human and cattle pressure that I have just elucidated. So despite that, we have had doubled the tiger numbers in the last 10 to 15 years, and mostly, I would say, have been increasing tiger numbers in the past also. So those were the major current issues in wildlife conservation in India. So let us now get into wildlife crime. A brief introduction to wildlife crime. So it is a demand-driven crime, first of all, okay? So only because of the demand, the wildlife crime is happening. It's an organized crime, which would mean that there's a chain of custody. Somebody shoots it, somebody shows the shooter around in the area, so what they're going to shoot, and then you have the carriers who carry it from the site to point A, somebody to point B, somebody to point C. Right. So, and then we have the financiers who finance all these operations as masterminds, but they are not locals, they are city based, and they are rarely found in the field. Of course, then we have the consumers who are mostly, for India's case, they're international consumers. Coming to these statistics from the UNODC, United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime report, this was released in July 2020, and there are some very interesting and alarming statistics in that report. Firstly, let me attract your attention towards the fact that in 2013-14, the number of wildlife crimes detected world over has almost increased by 50 to 100% in the years 2016-17 and maybe beyond. So the number of wildlife seizures have virtually doubled in a space of 4 to 5 years. That has to be really alarming. However, one should also say in the same breath that something has been detected does not mean that crime has risen. Okay, so more detections does not necessarily mean more crime. That has to be borne in mind. And if you look at what has changed in the last 5 years, so comparing 2009 to 2013, this 5 year period, to 2014 to 2018, this 5 year period, we would see that pangolins, which used to constitute only 4% of the global crime, now constitutes in the 2004 to 2018 pie chart, now constitutes 13.9% of all the wildlife, international wildlife crime, which would mean that there is an increase of more than 3 times for pangolin scales. Further, rhinos did not figure above 5.5% earlier. They were pegged at 5.5%. Now they figure at 11.8% of all wildlife crime put together, which would mean that the proportion of rhino crimes have doubled in the last 5 years period. Other alarming statistics from that report is regarding reptiles. We are really interested in reptiles because India is one of the source countries for major reptile species in illegal trade. Indian reptiles are highly sought after as pet. So India, in the left chart that you see, figures at 13.3% as the source country. If you remove the 38.3% unknown, India figures at a staggering 21.5%, which would mean that more than one reptile seized, maybe let's say 5 reptiles seized anywhere in the world, one of them would be from India. So that's an alarming statistics, definitely. And let us see what is possible to be done. Beyond that, what all species from India are being targeted, you can see in the pie chart on the right side of your screen. Indian star-wise figures at 21.3%, which would again mean that 1 in 5 turtles caught is a Indian star-wise. That is a remarkable piece of theory. Beyond that, if you look at the most disconcerting statistics, I would say, from the UNODC report, that is about pangolins. So till about 2014, the number of pangolin equivalents which were being caught was at 13.9 thousand pangolin animals equivalent. So basically, we would say that 13 to 15,000 animals have died to produce these many scales. Okay. However, if you look at the current scenario in 2018, the trade in pangolin has risen more than 10 times. From about 13 to 14,000, it has rose to 141.9 thousands in a space of 5 years. So that is really alarming. However, fortunately for us, most of that is African pangolin. However, African pangolin cannot sustain this kind of poaching pressure, and it is sooner or later going to be India's turn, and Indian pangolins which will be targeted. So we will come back to this report sometimes in the lecture, Worldwide Crime Report, Trafficking in Protected Species. So if you are interested, you can download this report. It is freely available from the internet. And these statistics and many more interesting ones, you can find in that book. Now, coming to wildlife scenario in India, a big contributing factor is the location of India. Geopolitically, India is surrounded by countries who have had a very long history of wildlife use. So, be it China with its traditional medicinal system, where almost every part of every animal is used to cure some ailment or something, or be it Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam or Cambodia, where wildlife is part of the cuisine, like being part of the tiger wine, etc., or be it Japan being a small island country consuming the highest amount of ivory in the whole world, or be it Middle East, where an artificial demand for rhino horns have been created following um, some kind of propaganda by interested vested interest groups. So India is unfortunately surrounded by neighbors who have had as a long history of wildlife use. That always puts some pressure, poaching pressure, on our wildlife. Further, the big diversity of India means that there is something in every taxa and every group of animals that is uh, lucrative to some collector or other. Be it tigers or rhinos from mammals, or be it starterwise or the vipers from reptiles, or the bird-wing butterflies from the insects, we have species which are coveted worldwide. We have very many species like that. So there is some demand on some animal always because of this very high diversity in India. Coming to eastern region, this problem is even more exacerbated because eastern region has a few more factors which compounds the problem. First of all, high value species like rhinoceros, tiger, leopard, elephant, bear species, etc., are all available here itself. So it is almost like an open treasury that we have. Further, there are 5 international borders in the area: Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar, China, and then uh, Bangladesh. Now, with Nepal and Bhutan, we have open borders because of the friend relationship with Bhutan. I will just talk about it. Besides that, um, I'm talking about before pandemic situation, where the Nepal-Bhutan borders were officially open, and any Bhutanese subject could come into India, Nepalese subjects could come into India, and Indian citizens can go into Nepal and Bhutan. So in these kind of scenario, smuggling of wildlife, or even for that matter, other contraband products, is very very difficult without very pinpoint information. Extremism and availability of arms is another factor which makes Northeast India very fertile ground for smuggling and similar activities. So all these things put together, it can be seen that the Northeast and North Bengal kind of emerges as the smuggling capital for wildlife articles in India, which would then go outside. And so this is the map of the reptile seizures where the reptiles are going, originating and going. So you can see China is the major sink of all reptiles coming into China, and then few are going out of the African countries, and similarly so forth. The ultimate destinations of these reptiles, like many other wildlife products, is China, Vietnam, these countries. Statistically put, China accounts for 50.4% of all pangolin scale equivalents as the destination country. Vietnam accounts for 13.3, and if you remove the 28.9% unknown seizures, then China would um, count for a whopping 70.9% of all the pangolin seizures as a destination country. Vietnam has 18.7%. So this is the pangolin trafficking map. More or less all road leads to China. And tigers, etc., it's slightly more complicated, but even then you can see going out of Bhutan, Nepal, from India, ultimately the tiger skins do land up in China. Similar statistics, alarming statistics. uh, I think I will just skip through the unimportant part. So if you straight away look at the most right pie chart that you have, For big cat seizures, India figures as a source country for 24.4% of seizures, which would mean that 1 in 4 tiger body part seizure, lion body part seizure, leopard body part seizure, India is the source of 1 in 4 seizures all over the world. That's an alarming statistic. And of course, we are analyzing why this response was achieved. Coming to international smuggling routes, most of it is through Northeast, as we have discussed. So when our rhinos get poached, when our pangolins get poached, and the animal parts travel into Northeast, we can expect that they're going to go through our Imphal borders, I mean Manipur borders, or through our Mizoram borders into Myanmar, and through the towns of Kalay, to the towns of Mandalay or Tiddim. They will go into these border markets known as Mongla or Tachilek. These are notorious areas with multiple jurisdictions. You have Laos in the north, sorry, in the east, you have China in the north, you have Thailand in the south, and it is an area where it is very easy to evade uh, the one country's authorities and then go into other country's authorities. So this area, this Mongla and Tachilek markets, they are known for all kinds of illegal activities, gambling, um, arms deals, drugs deal, and illegal wildlife trafficking, etc. So it is known to be as the golden triangle, golden for everything illegal. Quickly going through the species in illegal trade, tiger, of course, all tiger body parts are used. Leopards, similarly, with tigers becoming scarce, all leopard body parts are used. Rhino, only horns. There's a huge business of fake horns also. Elephant ivory, besides being invaluable to the collectors in Japan, even Indian collectors also crave for ivory idols, as it is evident in these figures. The upper one is a Caesar done from Calcutta itself. Pangolin scales, they are major ingredient of Chinese medicines and also pervades into Chinese myths and beliefs, and something like this Chinese soup, a fetus soup of Chinese pangolin, is also believed to be very, very potent. Musk deers, musk oats from males from higher altitudes of the Himalayas. And not only animals, plants are also targeted. These are red sandalwood, and it is found only in few districts of Andhra Pradesh, but has been confiscated from every state of India, south to north, east to west. Every state of India, it has been seized, and while most of it is dealt with by most of the red sanders, illegal business is enforced by the forest department, but still bodies like WCCB, etc., do have a tertiary role. Snake venom, it's a recent phenomena, and you have these jars of crystalline substances being referred to as snake venom. And then tokay geckos. The tokay geckos, well, living a relatively peaceful life, but 10 years back, somebody just thought that they are going to make some kind of great medicinal concoction, and thereafter lots and lots of geckos are being traded, sometimes without any clear idea that who are going to buy these, why they're going to buy that. Without that idea, these have now been started to be smuggled. The sloth bear and the brown bear, and also the Himalayan black bear, they are all, mostly these two, the sloth bear and the Himalayan black bear, they are um, victims of a very gruesome bear gallbladder trade, in which the gallbladders are traded for their supposed medicinal properties. We need to understand that it's a gallbladder, it contains bile salts, so it will have some kind of physiological effects on the person who consumes it. but there is no need to kill a bear and get its gallbladder and have its bile salts. You can just have simple over-the-counter allopathic medicines, which will be more effective than doing this. Okay, so bear bile and products is something which is decimating our uh, bear populations in India. Turtles and tortoises, of course, as we have talked about it, some of it is local because of pet trade, etc., and some of it is internationally connected, especially because of pets. On the left side of your screen, you have the pets, of which the Indian star tortoise is the real star. As we have seen, 1 in 4 to 5 Caesars all over the world is the Indian star tortoise. And then in the right hand side, you have the species for consumption, illegal consumption, flap-shelled or soft-shelled turtle and gangetic soft-shelled turtle, and both you can find mostly consumed within Bengal and in South Bengal. Deers for their antlers and hides, birds for caging them, deer antlers again, mongoose for their hairs. It is illegal to buy and use mongoose hair brushes. Please remember this. As students, I think you will have to have access to things that you will grow, etc. So please don't buy mongoose hair brushes. They're very easy to identify because this light and dark bands that is formed in the hair. So the beautiful snakes like the ornate flying snake or the green vine snakes, they are also sometimes used for smuggling. We have a case of a gharial saplings being tried to be smuggled out. Other things are the slow loris who are caged, and then sometimes different black magic practices are also performed on that. We have crocodile skins that we have seized. We have marine products like sea cucumber, coral, sea fan, sea horses that has been seized, and also plants. Please remember that the Wildlife Protection Act also has a section on plants, a list of plants, Schedule 6, in which these two vandas, Renantharum scutiana, the red vanda, and the Vanda caerulea, the blue vanda, are protected. Also, the Paphiopedilum genus Ladyslipper orchids are also protected by the Wildlife Protection Act. So, some of the activities. So, let us come into the wildlife crime activities that we see in West Bengal, especially in southern Bengal. So there is a lot of turtle trade, and I would say 90% of the turtle consumption trade of India is within West Bengal. There are some reptile trade, and we have done some seizures. This is one of our seizures. And in the winter months, we have winter visitor, the ducks, and there are sporadic hunting, sometimes organized hunting of those ducks. So that is something which can earn a person 3 years of imprisonment and 25,000 rupees in fine. So that is also happening in the water-logged areas in winter. Some of the fairs, they sell the turtle meat, they sell Indian birds with continuous operations. This has been contained to a great extent now. Examples of very large seizures. And there are some of the other more cultural fairs in which in fairs like Nag Panchami and Japan, etc., there are protected snakes which are being paraded and used, etc. So that is another form of wildlife crime that is happening here. And these fairs sometimes have stalls which would contain some wildlife products sometime, like you can see the sea fans here. Okay, or you can see the turtle carapaces here, which would be illegal to keep. and maybe some other fragments or pieces of wildlife that he peddles as some kind of religious good. However, the most concern regarding South Bengal wildlife crime is the hunting festivals. So, in the month of April, May, um, there are a lot of hunting festivals in which the tribals of those areas they participate, and there has been a lot of effort from the High Court, also directions to contain these activities, but they are still proving to be difficult. So some very sorry visuals from those areas during the hunting festivals, and there are hundreds of hunters who gather by the hundred, 700, 800 hunters, and the forest department does not have that kind of wherewithal to fight these many people. But gradually, with the high court directions and all, the police and the railway authorities and everybody is cooperating with the forest department, and the extent of hunting is much less in these last couple of years. A special mention of the fishing cat because it is uh, the state animal for West Bengal. It is killed for conflict, mostly because it lifts poultry. So those were the issues of wildlife crime that we are facing in southern Bengal. Little bit on what is Wildlife Crime Control Bureau. It is an authority established by the Wildlife Protection Act, and the mandate is to collect wildlife crime intelligence, to maintain a data bank, coordinate between different agencies like the Forest Department, the border guarding agencies, police, etc. A lot of capacity building trainings. We do raids and seizures ourselves, and policy advice to the government regarding wildlife crime and enforcement. With an India presence, there's some notable activities of Eastern region like the seizure of a live lion cub. Can you believe it? People are uh, smuggling in lion cubs, along with exotic langoose was seized in 2018. Then 32,000 mongoose hair brushes and many parakeets in many occasions. Snake venom jars and huge cache of turtles. 1,800 turtles on that night, including the truck that you see on the background, were seized. We do a lot of trainings, as we discussed, with the border guarding agencies also, like BSF, SSB, etc., with forest and police departments, also with local people in and around tiger reserves and other protected areas. We do come up with publications like these, pamphlets, etc. This is a bilingual pamphlet on wildlife crime in North Bengal. So the recent seizures and the types of seizures, etc., are highlighted. And those are the activities of WCCB. But beyond that, there are many other agencies also who are working to contain wildlife crime. BSF, SSB, railways, etc. The list is very, very long. But to just make you understand in a nutshell, if we imagine a game of cricket, then the striker may be the poacher or the carrier who is trying to take the wildlife article out of the boundary, which we can imagine as the international boundary. So the first ring of fielders that we have close in is the forest department, the police department, etc. They are the close in fielders. If the wildlife article manages to go beyond these close ring, this first ring, then we have the uh, out out outfield fielders. So there are two types of fielders there. There are legal export import points known as the authorized exit points, like seaports, like airports where cargo comes in and goes out legally. So those authorized exit points are manned by customs, DRI, CISF. We also have a presence in by WCCB, etc. But the vast majority of the border, which is unmanned and unguarded, that is known as the unauthorized exit point. So there we have the army patrolling, we have the navy, we have the coast guards, border security force, SSB, ITBP, etc. So if the wildlife article has managed to slip through this outfield also, if it is in the international arena, then the way ahead is to discuss with Interpol and then discuss with the enforcement authorities of the countries that we feel that it is there in, and then CITES headquarters, and try to nab uh, the offender and the wildlife article in that country by the agencies of those countries. So lastly, let me end by talking about what can be your role as a student in not only wildlife conservation, let's say nature conservation. And the first and foremost thing that I would request all of you to do is to reduce demands of energy, water, and other resources in your everyday life. You can really live by frugally. Try it. Excess is a crime. You know, anything which is in excess of what you need is not only a crime against environment, it is also a poison. To quote Chanakya, who was asked that what is poison, his answer was anything over and above the, the extent to which it is needed. Beyond that, everything is poison. Too much water is poison. Too much oxygen will burn you. So what you need, the basics, of your the basic necessities that you cover. Beyond that, try to reduce demands of energy, reduce demands of water, and every other resource in your life. That would go a long way for conservation of natural resources. Also, please avoid products and organisms which are taken out of forests. There are only very few certified forest producers which you can use, and which would not be detrimental to the forest, but vast majority of products taken out of forest are not environment friendly, are not sustainably taken out. So avoid anything which has been unsustainably taken out of the forest or from the nature. And beyond knowing these things to yourself, you should also educate your friends and families so that more and more people try to follow this frugal conservation lifestyle that would help nature in the long term. Also, you should visit the forest areas in your vacations, in your spare time. I have already talked about ecotourism and the importance of ecotourism and direct economic benefits of having wildlife. So, if you visit those areas, you would add to the income of the local people, who will feel happier about conserving the wildlife that they have because of the direct economic benefits, and you will have a fulfilling vacation. So, it's a win-win thing. Try to visit the forest areas and the wildlife-rich areas for your vacations. You can also participate in conservation programs organized by many government agencies, the Forest Department, many NGOs like WWF, etc. You should take part in awareness programs, field camps, etc. And that will give you a fair idea of conservation activities going on. Also, you should also report wildlife crime, anything that you can see around, to the wildlife authorities. You can find most phone numbers in the internet these days. The local forest authorities, police authorities, wildlife crime control bureau, you should report any wildlife crime that you see to those authorities. Regarding collection of information of wildlife crime, if you have anybody who's working in a railway station or bus terminus or any border areas, please ask them to keep their eyes and ears open. They can see things and know things and overhear things which can really be useful to enforcement agencies. Also, if you have people or if you are placed somewhere near forest areas, so please ask them to be vigilant about presence of unknown people there. If you see unknown suspicious people moving around forest areas, nearby forest areas, that can be a red flag. Other things that those people beside forest area should look for is traps inside forest, wandering tribes who are settling around forest areas. They are into all kinds of petty crimes. Sometimes they're into serious crimes against wildlife and sometimes even against humans. So those are the things that you should look for. And if you have somebody who are staying around forest, you can ask them to look for different types of traps, etc. And different types of people who are frequently visiting sensitive areas. were antique dealers. Antique dealers sometimes would deal illegally in tiger hide and all that. So that leather businessmen, ornamental fish dealers who will sell pet turtles. So all that, those are the category of people you should be sometimes looking out for, or ask your acquaintances to look out for, so that we can get a wind of wildlife crime. So these are the numbers where you can report for Eastern region. You can email, you can call these numbers, and of course your identity, anybody's identity who is an informer, is kept secret, of course. And you can also use the uh, website wccb.gov.in to get more contacts, and also use the official Facebook or Twitter handles. So that was all I wanted to say. Just let me end by taking you back to two places. One is Nicobar, which is the background. I was Division Forest Officer in Nicobar for a very sweet 2.5 years. So these are some of the photos from then. So this is Little Nicobar Island, one of the islands in the island chain. And being that in the backdrop, let me take you back to Cambridge University in 1665. And the Great Plague was afoot in Europe. So Cambridge University was sending their students home, and one of them was Isaac Newton, who had to go back to their family estate and then spend most of the next year of 1666 confined in his family home. So you'd expect that it would be an unproductive year for Newton, but that is not so. The year 1666 is termed as Newton's Annus Mirabilis, his wonder year, because he could just sit and think through his theories and achieve unthinkable breakthroughs in fields of advanced physics. This is a lesson for us, is not it? Our activities are very, very limited. A pandemic is still at large. We are still restricted, but then all crises are opportunities. I understand as college students, you are feeling restless, you are not being able to meet your beloved friends, but then use these opportunities, these times of solitude, to develop yourself. If you want to get fitter, do that. If you want to read some new books and develop some new skills, maybe playing a musical instrument, maybe learning to ride a bike, or maybe learning a new language, do that and use this time to get out much stronger at the other end of the pandemic with new skill sets. So that is all I wanted to tell you. Thank you for patient listening. It is now over to the moderators again for any question and answer that might arise. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a very interesting, though alarming presentation. And we are very thankful that you could share your knowledge and expertise with all of us. So we do have some questions for you. So if you're ready, we'll get to them.
Yeah, sure, we can do that.
Okay. So I must say that you've been an inspiring presence, because the first question that we have is from Doipayan Shorkar. And he asks how to pursue a career in wildlife conservation in India, how to join WWF India.
Okay. So if you say a career in wildlife conservation, I must say that there are few ways to do the to be part of wildlife conservation in India. First and foremost, I would say what I have chosen for myself is the administrative way. So this is, of course, the path which will give you the most amounts of control, the most amounts of authority, and government funds to carry out your conservation vision. So I would advise that this is the thing that should try out first. The other ways are, of course, research. As I had said, we had excellent research of wildlife through the Wildlife Institute of India, through other private, non-governmental organizations like the um, WCS, Wildlife Conservation Society. That's an NGO with an excellent track record of wildlife research. Other agencies, other government research like IISC, and some of the other bodies. So you can think to join some of these bodies and then pursue a career in wildlife research. Other thing is to be part of the NGOs like WWF. So they advertise positions. You can firstly be a part of their activities. They take a lot of volunteers. You can be a volunteer and look at their activities, and if you like their activities, you can then think about getting a full-time job. So you should look at the sites of WWF. The West Bengal State Office is in um, Tata Building, I think, in Esplanade. So they have Facebook pages, and they would upload their activities, and you can firstly participate in those activities, and then if you like, go on to be a formal part of their team. So that is what I would advise. And there are also options of going abroad and doing research from there. There are excellent research being done from US, and if you're interested in marine research, then Australian universities, some other UK also is very, very good for wildlife conservation research. So you can think about being part of those universities also. And of course, you have to give the normal entrance exams like TOEFL and GRE for American universities, etc. So those are the broadly those are the options that you have for a career in wildlife conservation.
Thank you, sir. I think he'll find all those directions very helpful. So the next question is from Atri Trivedi. She asks, how far wildlife trade has been controlled in India?
That's a very difficult question to answer, because to say that certain thing has been controlled to a measurable extent, 50%, 70%, you would need to have the baseline values. You need to have um, uh, the figures that wildlife trade was at this extent, and then they have decreased to such an extent. And keep in mind, as I have said earlier, more detections of wildlife crime does not mean more crime. It might mean actually better enforcement. So you have more seizures, and you think, Babre, these things have increased, but that is not so. These things are now getting better detected. That might be a reason. So all these confounding factors present, I don't think we can really say we can put a percentage or put a fraction on that this amount of wildlife crime has been controlled. But all I can say is that the enforcement effort is much more organized these days. The enforcement agencies are technically quite equipped. They are well trained, and one of the efforts of WCCB is to continue to train forest and police personnel so that the cases are presented properly in the courts, and so that we have conviction. So those trainings being there, the capacity of the BSF, etc., to detect wildlife products getting enhanced. I would say that there are a lot of detections these days, and I would say that we are in a much better space that we were maybe 10, 15 years earlier with regards to enforcement against wildlife crime. That is all I can say. I don't think it is a measurable uh, factor, measurable variable that you can really say that we have decreased it by such and such percent.
Thank you, sir. I understand it's a difficult percentage to get to. Okay, so the next question is from Mrinmoy Pal. He's asking, what is the biggest threat to wildlife in India?
So I have listed the threats basically to wildlife in India. Um, I would say, to my mind, it is this lack of awareness in people, this lack of understanding that development without sustainability is really walking towards doomsday. It is suicide. This illiteracy, ecological illiteracy of the educated at times is what is the biggest threat against wildlife conservation in India. That people don't understand that so-called development will have to be balanced against environment. Otherwise, we are just using up our capital. We are not going to be left with anything. If COVID pandemic has shown us anything, it is only that nature is supreme. All the constructed human uh, imaginary uh, uh, you know constructs like the stock market, it is nothing that exists, but that drives hundreds and crores of resources and involves so much people. All those will just fall flat in front of the biological reality of a pandemic, it is going to happen. It is nature's way of controlling overpopulations. So, so I would say that the lack of awareness of biological realities, of the need to conserve, of the need to balance ecological needs against our economical aspirations, that lack of awareness is the greatest threat against wildlife conservation in India. That is my opinion.
I agree with you, sir. If the last 1.5 year has shown us anything, it is a wake-up call for all of us. So the next question is from Priyanka Sengupta. She says, how to increase the effectiveness of the institutional policy of nature protection and biodiversity?
It's a good question, and let me first point out the problem in India. The problem regarding policy effectiveness in India is that the implementation of the policies are at times not in the hands of experts. It is in the, administration in general does not have scientific expertise. Scientific expertise has to be brought in from outside, from outside of the government, so outside of the administration. So it may be scientific organizations like the Wildlife Institute of India, etc. So they would frame the policies, but the policy, they would give you the information to frame the policies, but then framing the policies and implementing is the bureaucracy's job. And many a times, because of lack of uh, mm, uh, you know a high level of understanding of conservation issues, sometimes the implementation is not as effective as it can be. So, to bring in more effectiveness, you need more subject matter expert, more field experts in policy making and implementation. So that is, I would say, one part of it. The second part of it is, of course, resource allocation. Wildlife and forest is not a priority for any government, be it state or central or whomsoever. So the resource allocation is poor. So you are tasked with impossible tasks, and then the conservation efforts are not as effective because you've just not added enough sugar to make the tea sweet. So I don't know if that can change with time, maybe with more ecological literacy, as I was speaking about, we can have that. But right now, that is also an issue. So more resource allocation, more subject matter expert in policy formulation and field implementation. I think that would make our conservation policies even more effective.
I see, sir. So it's an entire overhaul to the attitude towards policy making that needs to be changed, I suppose. So the next question is again from Atri Trivedi. She asks, what is the main cause of rapid decline in biodiversity of corals?
I'm not aware about exact figures of if there is a rapid decline or something, but what I understand is that uh, when you talk about decline in biodiversity, that is a different thing. It is not the same as in decline of populations. So the number of species, if they're not declining, so it's not theoretically that kind of a biodiversity decline. Anyway, so there is a rapid decline in coral populations, and that is because of global warming. Global warming adversely affects sea temperatures, seawater temperatures, and warmer temperatures causes the symbiotic algae to move out of the corals, the zooxanthellae, and that causes bleaching of corals. And without the algae, the corals die in a few weeks, few months time, because basically being starved. So that is the reason. Global warming is a very big reason, and people. I have worked in Andamans for about 5 years, and people are there who have seen very lush, beautiful coral reefs just getting all dead in few years' time, and that is because of global warming. So that is the main reason. Sea surface temperature rise, and that has a very long and difficult solution ahead of us. If the all of the world nations commit to it, then let's see if we can reverse that.
Okay, Okay, sir. I understand. We have a sort of a tagalog question to the corals from Pragya Chakraborty. She asks, what can we do as general people for the restoration of coral biodiversity?
I think there are projects in which fragments of corals are being used for repopulating the reefs. So you can support those projects financially. You can, if you're interested in participating yourself, you can visit those sites and then participate. And I mean, basically, the other thing is to raise your voice. The social media is there, and the exact sites where our marine protected areas are there in Andamans, in Tamil Nadu coast, all there. So you can just support the local conservation initiatives. Be there, protest against any activities which you think is detrimental to coral health. Even in social media, being at your own home, that is possible. So the governments take note of public opinion, and if there is a very strong public opinion against something which is harming the coral reefs, I think it will go a long way in preserving them. So those things are possible. Financial contribution to non-governmental agencies who are working on coral reef restoration, physical participation, voicing your opinion in social media, in actual field. All those things would help the corals getting conserved.
Okay, sir. We have two questions from Dr. Arunachal Chatterjee. The first one is, what is the fate of the animal parts after their seizure?
Okay. So, as long as the court case is going on, which takes a few years, it is considered as court property, and it is preserved if it is something which can be preserved, like a tiger skin or a deer antler. It is dry, it can be preserved, it is preserved till the disposal of the case. So, once the case is disposed of, the accused may be sentenced to some penalty, or may not be, but the wildlife article is deemed to be is bound to be destroyed. Only a few wildlife articles are allowed for museums, for educational institutions, for research, but otherwise it is not allowed for public display or use. It is destroyed, and sometimes it is just given to the research organizations. If it is something which cannot be preserved, like let's say meat of turtles which has been caught, or meat of deer, if that has been seized, it is destroyed after it has been exhibited to the court. After the court has seen, yes, the deer meat has been seized, a order is passed by the court to destroy it, and further the case goes on the basis that it was there, it was seen, and it has been affirmed by the court that the seizure has happened. So that is the thing about wildlife articles. Either if it's a preserved material, it can be preserved only for research and scientific purposes, museums, etc., or otherwise it is destroyed. And if it's a perishable material, it is destroyed outright, and the case goes on the presumption of the seizure.
Very well, sir. That is rather insightful. We never knew what happens to, articles that have been seized. So he has a second question, Dr. Arunachal Chatterjee. Government is spending money for saving nature, but at the same time, they are fragmenting habitat for wildlife. So, for example, like building highways and water canals through the Rajaji National Park. So, how do you see that?
Yeah, so I was talking about the lack of ecological literacy is all pervasive, and of course it is frustrating at times, but um, it is better than before. It is better than 10, 15 years before. Now, generally, people will agree that cutting trees is bad, and killing animal is bad. And nowadays, there are tigers who are so famous that their demise would make national headlines in Ranthambore or Bandhavgarh. So people are more aware, more sensitive about wildlife now. And if people are more aware, more sensitive about wildlife, the government has to take note of that. So the things are better, but as you said, that there is of course lack of coordination. But to safeguard against that, there are laws, wildlife habitats, etc. You just cannot build through it. You need the clearances, the forest clearance, the environmental clearance. There are processes. If there are wildlife areas involved, you need wildlife clearance. So you want to build anything through Rajaji, you have to go through the mandatory clearances, and It's a pretty exhaustive process. I'm not saying that it's foolproof, but it's an exhaustive process, and generally you will have to pay for a host of conservation activities if you really wanted to go through a wildlife habitat. So they will make you pay for a lot of other conservation initiatives that can be carried out from that fund. So that is the balance that the forest department tries to strike. But yes, with more awareness and more uh, demand from people that conservation is our priority, I think scenes will change for even better.
Okay, so that is a little hopeful for all of us. So we have another question from Shoykot Pal. He's saying, is it possible to stop wildlife smuggling completely?
Is it possible to stop any crime completely in society? I don't think it is possible to stop any crime completely. However, it
No.
can be, so it can be minimized to a great extent if there is coordination among the enforcement agencies, if the civil society around those areas are strong, if we have stricter implementation of law, it can be minimized. But as with any crime, I don't think we can say that it can be done away with completely uh, eliminated. I don't think that is a reality. That would be an utopian expectation.
Right, sir. Okay, so we have the last question from Priyanka Sengupta. Is the conservation of biodiversity of entire biological ecosystems the key issue for nature conservation?
First of all, we need to understand what is nature conservation. Why are we conserving nature? Let me tell you, I generally have this topic as a part of my talk. Today it was not there. Nature conservation is not for conserving nature. Nature conservation is only for human survival. We should understand this limited, selfish purpose of what we call as conservation. Let's say today, if we stop all conservation activities, we just indiscriminately start cutting down forest, use that wood, use that fossil fuels, we just burn fossil fuels, petroleum products indiscriminately, then what is going to happen? We are going to have a very high rate of global warming. The earth is going to become hot and hotter, and we are going to have extreme weather events, cyclones, and whatnot. And we will have rains in deserts, and then forest fires in rainforests, and we are going to get extinct ourselves in 400, 500, maybe 1,000 years. Of course, we will take with us many hundreds, maybe thousands of species to extinction. But once the human race is extinct after this orgy, what will happen is that nature will set back to its own rhythm. The forest is going to grow back and sequester all that carbon from the atmosphere back. The atmospheres will cool down. There will be, ecological processes again functioning properly. There would be evolutionary processes functioning, and so maybe in 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 years, there will be flourishing, diverse ecosystems as those existed at the advent of humankind. So nature will back to be herself once we get extinct ourselves. What we are doing by so-called conservation is just making the earth habitable for ourselves, nothing more. We want this global warming to stop. We want our resources, natural resources, to continue for ourselves. It is not a some kind of a charity to nature that we are doing. We are just prolonging our own existence, and nature does not need conservation from humans. If we just go extinct, like I said, it is going to set herself right in 300,000 years, which is not too much time in her scale. So the purpose of nature conservation is human survival, prolonged human survival. We should understand this, and we should be humble about this. Now, whether the key of nature conservation is biodiversity conservation, yes, it is, of course. I think, uh, you know, first of all, the principle of live and let live. All species has an equal right to be in this planet, like our being our neighbors. So we need to conserve the biodiversity, and we do not know what species are playing what exact role in the ecosystem. So we need to conserve them all, lest the ecosystem fall apart, and our processes, the life cycles of oxygen, water, etc., on which we are dependent, those fall apart, causing our doom. So yes, to my mind, nature conservation is conservation of biodiversity, but we should keep in mind it is not a charity that we are doling out to nature. It is for our own prolonged human survival.
Thank you, sir. I think we have found the perfect takeaway from your talk that nature conservation is for human survival. Thank you so much for answering all those questions and being very patient with us. And we hope that we will find you with us again some other time in some other event. So thank you so much once again. And for now, I will move on to the next session. And for the next session, I will hand over the platform to Aniruddha to carry on. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So it was a very insightful and informative talk by Ogni. So thank you for spending your time with us and educating the students on this important issue. So for our next talk, we have Dr. Sandeep Pal. So Dr. Pal is currently working as an assistant professor at the Department of
Okay,
Zoology,
hello,
Professor.
Aniruddha.
So,
Hello,
yeah,
Aniruddha,
so
am
I
I
will
audible?
request my colleague Dr. Nivedita Kole to introduce Dr. Pal. So your screen is rotated, Nivedita Di. Can you
Okay,
just
okay, I'm trying.
rotate it
Actually, I
90
lost
degrees?
my connection.
Uh,
That's why I'm having some problem. Okay, let me turn up the camera, then I can say. Okay, yeah, am I audible to everyone? I'm very sorry because I have lost my connection at this moment. Okay, so can you hear everyone?
yes, yes, we can hear you. Please carry on.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Okay, I am very much delighted to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Sandeep Pal, Assistant Professor in the Department of Zoology, Barakpur Rashtraguru Surendranath College. He is also the guest faculty at Zoology Postgraduate Section of Ashutosh College and Gurudas College, Kolkata. Dr. Pal did his BSc in Zoology Honours from Ashutosh College, Kolkata, MSc in Zoology from Baligan Science College, University of Calcutta, and PhD in Biotechnology from Macau, formerly known as WBUT. He has more than 10 years of teaching experience, published more than 20 research articles in various reputed national and international journals. Presently working on the effect of Drosophila species in collaboration with Postgraduate Department of Zoology, Ashutosh College in West Bengal DST project. He has also a patent for the invention of a synergistic herbal composition from fermented black tea having radioprotection and process of preparing the same. He is also the lifetime member of Society for Radiation Research and Indian Biophysical Society. Besides this, he has special interest in traveling, photography, blogging, and founder of virtual academic platform for students and educators, Biologic. So now I welcome Dr. Sandeep Pal to deliver his talk.
Thank you so much for nice words. Hope I am audible.
Yes,
Yes,
you're
you are.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank the principal madam of Sarojini Naidu College for Women, IQAC coordinator, departmental head, Mala madam, and all the faculty members of zoology department and the organizers for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts on this auspicious occasion of World Nature Conservation Day. It's an honor to share the same platform with Mr. Agnimitra. Even I'm a great fan of him. Let me tell you that I am not as good speaker as Mr. Mitra, but I will definitely make you understand, especially the students, the theoretical basis of conservation. My talk will be based more on ecological perspective of conservation, since the participants are from diverse fields, even from schools, as I have heard, I will stick to basic. So let me share my screen. Is it visible, my screen? Can you please confirm?
No, sir, not.
Is it visible now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, it's visible.
Thank you. So today my topic of discussion is thoughts and stories on conservation. It's a very simple, simplified topic actually. Conservation, as we know, is no doubt a collective effort, as Mr. Mitra mentioned, um, and it is comprised of political, environmental, and social movement that seeks to protect natural resources, including animal, plant species, as well as their habitat for the future. So the sentence I have just mentioned seems complex, right? So to understand conservation in a simpler way, you need to ask yourself few simple questions. So in today's talk, I am going to ask those questions to myself and to the audience, and we'll try to find out the feasible answers. So here goes the first question. Why to conserve? It means, what is the purpose of conservation? Why should we conserve? There must be some reason. So we humans are changing or modifying our surrounding environment so fast that it ultimately ends up declining biodiversity. And in the next slide, you will get to see the effect of human population increase on the extinction of biodiversity. As you can see in this graph, this is the human population graph increasing from 1800 to 2000, and it's increasing. And this green one is the extinction, that is extinction of species, extinction crisis. So it is so much positively correlated that with the increase of human population, the extinction is going on at the almost at the same rate. And in the next slide, you will see the different rates of extinction among different species, mostly the higher vertebrates like mammals. The extinction rate, the curve is steeper, and extinction rate is much more high than other vertebrates and birds. And lower vertebrates and other invertebrates, the curve is not that much steep. And you may say that yes, background extinction occurs each and every time when human was not present on this planet. There was also extinction events, right? But the rate of background extinction, this dotted line is the background extinction rate, which is much more slower than the extinction rate is occurring due to human interventions. Next, move on to the five major threats to biodiversity. There are lots of threats to biodiversity and the cause of declining biodiversity, but I have here considered five major threats. What are they? First one, climate change. These all you know, students, all you know, you have in your syllabus that climate change, habitat loss, pollution, invasive species, and overexploitation. So I will explain each and every one in the next slide. First is climate change. Climate change to know what is climate change, first of all, we need to know what is the difference between the weather and climate. So, weather is the conditions of the atmosphere over a short period of time, and when that period is longer, say 20 years or 50 years or 100 years, the average of that is called climate. So whenever we say the climate is changing, that is the average of this huge span of weather, which is called climate, is changing over time. So there are lots of effects of climate change, and this is the, in a nutshell, it is an infographic showing the effect of climate change, especially on ocean. There are triple threat, that is warmer environment, less oxygen in the ocean water, and it gets more acidic. And as a consequence, there are so many adverse effects like sea level rise. You all know bleaching, coral bleaching. I think coral bleaching. Next, toxic algae, proliferation of toxic algae, or lower oxygen level leads to the suffocation of the marine animals, and acidification. More acidic water harms animals that build shells, and then the shells get thinner, and there are loss of fisheries, and there are great effect of climate change on the fishes as well. And these effect of climate change is also on the local communities or terrestrial communities. Like there are so many effects of climate change, and there are environmental effects, health effects, and economic impact. So these are few effects of climate change in a broader scale. Next, move on to the second trait, that is habitat loss. Habitat loss can be divided into three subdivisions, like habitat destruction, habitat degradation, and habitat fragmentation. So habitat destruction is this is the picture says that the habitat of the wildlife and animals is destroyed due to the cutting of trees, and there are lots of destructive effects conferred by humans on forest habitats. That is called habitat destruction. Degradation is slightly different. Habitat degradation means a general term. It is a general term describing the set of processes by which habitat quality is reduced. So if the habitat quality is reduced, so it may be considered as it is degraded. And habitat degradation may occur through natural processes or through human activities, both. And the last one is the habitat fragmentation, which may be a simple one, but it is the one of the major traits of declining biodiversity. This habitat fragmentation. So let me tell you by this schematic diagram. So this is the habitat fragmentation process and how it affects wildlife or decline of biodiversity. So this is the whole area of, say, forest, and this is each side is 10 kilometer. So the total area is 100 square kilometer, and this is the same area which is fragmented by roads or railway tracks. So it is fragmented like this, and this single larger habitat is fragmented into four, you may say, sub-habitats. So what actually happens? It opens up the edges of the community, that particular community or habitat, and lots of edges occur. So there is a term called perimeter to area ratio. if the perimeter of area ratio increases, here how it happens. This is the perimeter to area ratio, which is 0.4, but here perimeter to area ratio is 80 by 100, that is 0.8. It's simple calculation. So when perimeter area increases, the edges increases, and due to the increase of age, the in most of the cases, biodiversity declines, as Mr. Mitra mentioned that road kills occurs. There are elephant killing in railway tracks. You know, in North Bengal it happens. So these all things happens, and ultimately the biodiversity of that particular region declines. So this is the very simpler way of telling what is habitat fragmentation is. Next, the third threat, that is pollution. You all know there are lots and different types of pollutions, like air pollution, land pollution, noise pollution, water pollution, and light pollution. It is also a very important part of it. So I'm not going into detail because you all know what pollution is, and this pollution is killing the biodiversity. It is also having adverse effects on human health. So this is obviously a important threat. Next one is it is not sometimes it is considered, but it is also a very important threat to biodiversity. That is invasive species. It is sometimes called the invasive alien species. What is that? So invasive alien species means species whose introduction or spread outside their natural habitat or natural geographic range threatens the biological diversity of that area where it is introduced. So these are few examples. There are lots of examples. I have considered only 4 examples where this is the Japanese beetle. Their origin is Japan, and it is introduced to USA, and it becomes pest there. That is invasive species and declining the biodiversity of that introduced region. It is the Burmese python. The original habitat is Southeast Asia, Burmese, you know, Myanmar, and it is again introduced in USA. This is zebra mussel, which is normally found in Russia or Ukraine, that region, and it is also introduced USA, and it is very destructive invasive species. And this one, that is cane toad, mainly found in North America and Central America, and they were introduced. There is a very interesting story. Let me tell you that cane toads were introduced to Australia in 1935 with the intention to control the cane beetle in sugarcane fields. You can find cane beetle in northern Queensland. But however, the gun backfired, and cane toads have proved to be pests themselves. So 85 years back, only 102 cane toads were introduced initially in that Queensland region, and now the figure is, you won't believe, it is 200 million, this cane toad. So you know how destructive it is. It is a prolific, it reproduces very fast, prolific breeder. And that's why, and ultimately to wipe out one pest, another pest is introduced as an invasive species in Australia. So this is also one of the major threats that we may encounter in conservation processes. And the last and fifth threat, that is overexploitation, and it is very much related to the crimes, whatever mentioned by Mr. Mitra, that we humans, as the population is increasing, the demand is increasing, and that's why lots of resources are required, mainly food resources, and there are also other resources. This is the fishing, overfishing. This is the shark fin, which is used for preparing shark fin soup, and the whole body of the shark is thrown away, just to take these fins. And the logging is also there, the expansion of agricultural fields and human urbanization, uh, these occurs, and this mining, it is also killing biodiversity everywhere. So these are the few examples of overexploitation of resources that is actually harming the biodiversity. So let's next move on to the next part, that is what to conserve. So we need to identify the animal or plant or any organism that which one to conserve. There are so many animals. We can't conserve each and every one. It is not possible. So we need to have some what should I say, some system to measure the vulnerability of that particular animal. So whenever you search any animal on internet, you will get a Wikipedia page like this. This is the page of Bengal tiger, and you will find a conservation status like this one. I have zoomed it out, and it goes like this. There are few circles written extinct in the wild, and there are red, orange, and yellow circles, and then nearly threatened and least concerned. So here you can see the orange button is on, that is the status, conservation status of that particular animal, that is tiger, is endangered according to the IUCN version 3.1. So what how it is done? Actually, it is obviously it is done by the IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature, and how it can be quantified. Like this is the all the species, so we don't have information about all the species. So this portion is omitted out, that is not evaluated, and whatever information we have, that one is evaluated. Evaluated can be grouped into two parts. One is data deficient, that is not much data is available for that particular animal or plant. And where the adequate data is available, now we can group it in different types or sections. So it goes like this. This is least concerned, nearly threatened, and these three are threatened categories, that is vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered, and then extinct in the wild, and ultimately extinct all over. You will not find, you are not going to find that particular animal or plant around you or anywhere. So this is the divisions laid down by the IUCN Red List, and these are the guidelines. I am not going into detail, but showing you a glimpse of it. Guidelines for using the IUCN Red List for categorization, and these are the criteria actually used by IUCN to categorize the animal with increasing threat. So these are all criteria. It is based on actually 5 criteria, A to E, and based on certain quantitative data, it can be categorized as critically endangered or vulnerable. Next, move on to the next part, that is how to conserve. So we know our reason for conservation, we know what to conserve, and now let's move on to how to conserve. So these are also is in your syllabus, and most part of it is already mentioned by Mr. Mitra. But I am going to tell you a slightly different part. So biodiversity conservation can be done by in situ conservation or ex situ conservation. You all know. So in situ means on-site conservation. That is, animals or plants are kept in their natural habitat and they are conserved. It can be done by protected area network. There are different kinds of protected areas like national parks, sanctuaries, biosphere reserves, and there is a special type, that is sacred groves and sacred lakes. I am coming into that. And the other part is ex situ conservation, that is off-site conservation. So off-site conservation, the examples of off-site conservations are botanical gardens, zoological gardens. There are seed banks, cryopreservation facilities, sacred plants or home gardens. These all are examples of ex situ conservation, where the animal or plant, either full body part or the part of their body, is conserved. They are taken out of their natural habitat and conserved separately in botanical garden or zoological garden, and we try to uh, increase their population, and then we reintroduce into their natural habitat. So these are the ways by which we can conserve biodiversity. So today I will confine myself to this particular topic, that is, which is much less discussed, sacred groves or sacred lakes, mainly sacred groves. So I don't think most of the students know about it, but you have seen that what is sacred groves? Sacred groves are the patches of primeval forest that some rural communities protect as abodes of deities. Such ecosystem people, that is, inhabitants of that forest, draw their livelihood from nearby resources and value nature for the ecological services it provides, that is, the forest provides. So on conservation point of view, this is very important, and it is practiced traditionally. It is from very old age. The forest dwellers are practicing this kind of conservation efforts. So if we name a particular tree or particular area in the name of any deity, so people will not harm that particular plant or that area, and the purpose of conservation can be accomplished. So this is the basic concept of sacred groves. And very famous ecologist, Indian ecologist, um, uh, Professor Madhav Gadgil. Um, there is a very good article published in Scientific American Journal, that sacred groves and ancient tradition of nature conservation. And in that particular article, he has mentioned the importance of such sacred groves, mainly in the Western Ghats region. Western Ghats region, but it is, you can see it in every forest areas or any habitat. So these are a few examples or photographs of sacred groves in different parts of India, um, and there are a few examples from West Bengal as well. Let me show you. So this is the Kanak Durga temple of Chilkigor, that is Jhargram. I have visited in last week. So it is recognized. I don't know how much of you know that it is now recognized as a biodiversity heritage site by the Biodiversity Board, and there are almost 530 medicinal plants in that particular area, and it is the best example of sacred groves in the West Bengal, in our state. And there are and this is the very good example, which is recognized now as biodiversity heritage site. And this is the Pokhari Lake of Jayanti, and this is a sacred lake. Whatever I have mentioned in few slides before, that this is a sacred lake, and people take care of this lake like anything. They don't allow tourists to throw anything in that particular lake, and how it is conserved. This is an amazing idea. And now we have let's move on to the last part of my talk, that is few inspiring stories. So here are a few inspiring stories of personalities who almost single-handedly changed their surrounding environment for the betterment of future. So the first one is very famous, Salumara Thimakka. She is an Indian environmentalist noted for her work in planting 385 banyan trees along a 4-kilometer stretch of highway. And this is the place, this one. And those banyan trees have grown up now, and she treats them like her child. She has also planted nearly 8,000 other trees, and she received no formal education and worked as a casual laborer. And she was conferred with Padma Shri in the year 2019. It is so inspiring. And the next one is Jadhav Pine, which is also known as the Forest Man of India. Um, um, his full name is Jadhav Mulai Pine. He is an environmental activist and forestry worker from Majuli, Assam. Over the course of several decades, he has planted trees on a sandbar. Uh, Let me show you the actual picture of that particular sandbar region of the river Brahmaputra, turning it into a forest reserve like this. Um, the forest is now called Mulai Forest after him, and he was also honored with Padma Shri in 2015. Um, she is Jamuna Tudu, um, also known as Lady Tarjan, uh, for taking on the for the taking on the timber mafias in Jharkhand areas. Jamuna was prevented by the family from doing all this, but she set out and campaigned to unite the women of that local village and save the forest. Many times they were subjected to deadly attacks, but Jamuna never gave up, and the decision to save the forest was upheld. She was honored with Padma Shri in 2019. Now let's cross the national border. She is very famous. You all know Jane Goodall is an English primatologist and anthropologist. Goodall is best known for her 60 years work on social and family interactions of wild chimpanzees. Uh, she even understands the language of chimpanzees. She is considered to be the world's foremost expert on chimpanzees. He is less known, but uh, he is very famous in Senegal. Haidar El Ali is Africa's most influential ecologist. Let me tell you a story that nearly 133,000 acres of mangroves disappeared in Senegal between 1980 to 2005. So to help fight against mangrove degradation, Ali organized massive replanting efforts with hundreds of villages in that particular village, uh, Casamance, in Senegal. So between 2006 and 2012, countless villagers helped replant about 35,000 acres of mangrove. Ali has led a program that has planted, you won't believe, 152 million mangrove birds in the Casamance Delta of southern Senegal over the past 10 years or a decade. And the reforestation project in southern Senegal has become one of the largest of its kind in the world. And that's amazing, amazing work by Haider El Ali. So next one is my last slide. So let's end the talk or discussion with this quote by E.O. Wilson. So look closely at nature. Every species is a masterpiece, exquisitely adapted to the particular environment in which it has survived. So who are we to destroy or even diminish biodiversity? Once we realize the question and find its answer, with fingers crossed, we can hope to restore our planet's natural rhythm. Thank you. Thank you for your patience listening. And I would also like to say that I have a virtual academic platform, Biology, in several social media. And if you have any questions further, you can reach me out at these two email IDs. So thank you. So over to the moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Pal, for a very nice and informative presentation. So we have some questions. So
Yes.
let me just read them out to you one by one. So actually, there are, I think, one or two questions left from the previous session, which we did not ask because we were running late. So maybe I can put those to you if they might be of interest for you to answer. So one question was by Shoigot Paul. So at present, is India facing any threat regarding keystone species? That was the question.
Keystone species, as far as I know, that crab species is a very good keystone species in the intertidal zone. So yes, in few beaches of India, even in our Mandarmani beach, you will find that 10 years back, when we visit Mandarmani, there are so many red crabs out there, but due to human due to lots of tourists and human interventions. So they are actually confined to a particular place now. You can't find them all over the Mandarmani beach. So this picture is almost everywhere where the tourist pressure is high. So in such cases, because we know that crab species are very good keystone species in intertidal zone, and obviously so much tourist pressure or human pressure is actually a threat to them, obviously.
So another question was by Blessy George. The question was, why are scientists trying to introduce genetically modified mosquitoes in the ecosystem? Won't it harm the normal mosquitoes?
Uh, I, Actually, those genetically modified mosquitoes are introduced to actually biologically control the mosquito. And you know, for a human being, a mosquito is treated as harmful. You might agree. And that's why those genetically modified are introduced in the ecosystem or in our surroundings, so that when they copulate with the normal mosquitoes, their reproductive efficacy declined, or their population decreases. So with the point of view of biological control, those genetically modified mosquitoes are being introduced. Any other questions?
So next question is from Astrid Trivedi. She's asking, is corona pandemic a blessing to nature? Does lockdown somehow help nature to replenish itself?
Oh yeah, certainly. We all know in the first wave, during the first wave, we have seen in the television that there are so many places around the world, um, due to less tourist pressure or human pressure. Um, those wildlife or animals are they are everywhere. Uh, so in beaches where in normal time you can't find any crabs or fishes. So during lockdown, you are able to see those. Obviously, it happens whenever there is no external pressure. The nature will reclaim the space, and that's what happened during lockdown.
Okay. So the next question is by Priyanka Sengupta. So the question is, what are the possible ecological impacts of technological mitigation strategies, for example, coastal defenses, that have been developed to allow human communities to adapt to climate change?
Pardon, please. Can you please read out
So
once more?
the question is about the technological mitigation strategies
Mhm.
that have been developed to allow human communities to adapt to climate change. And as an example, this participant has asked about coastal defenses.
Coastal
Defenses.
defense. Uh, yeah, technological advancement is somewhat required, and it is on us how we should use the technology. Technology can be used against nature, and it can also be used to save nature. So actually, it depends uh, uh, on the hand of human race. So what to do? So uh, technological advancement is always required, but the what should I say? Um, the mentality of human race should be changed, and that's how we can save, conserve nature or conserve wildlife, whatever you say, and we can coexist with each other.
Okay, thank you. And okay, so next question is from Mrinmoy Pal. So the question is, can we restore extinct animal species by conserving their tissue or cell or anything? Is it
Yes.
possible and safe for biodiversity?
Mhm. That's a very good question, and I have mentioned in ex situ conservation part there are preservation of preservation of animal body parts, or so there are few success stories, but there are examples that we can restore. Even oh, I was going through an article that there it is mentioned that we can restore the uh, dinosaurs from, if DNA is available in any fossil. I don't think very less amount, or there is no DNA left. But if there is a declining species, you know that that species is going to be extinct, and you preserve its body part or embryo or ovum or sperm, you can, we have that technology to bring back those species among us.
Thank you for the detailed explanation. So the next question is from Atri Trivedi. So what is arboreta as mentioned in ex situ conservation?
Yes, arboreta is much more like botanical garden. But as far as I know, I am not a botanist, but as far as I know, in case of arboreta, botanical garden is open for tourists, but arboreta is actually exclusively for preserving those plants. That's the very thin line of difference, but almost synonymous with botanical garden. Any botanist, I think, uh, he or she can answer better than me.
Okay, so now we have also one or two questions from those who are attending through the Google Meet as compared to the YouTube. So the one question is, how can you categorize a specific species among 3 or 4 different endangered species as to conserve first? So, or how can you categorize your priority of choice in saving species?
Yes, uh, as I have mentioned that there are threatened categories are three. Basically, there are three threatened categories: vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered. So, among these three, the most threatened one is the critically endangered, then endangered, and vulnerable is comparatively safe species as compared to the other two. So, we will give priority to those species that is coming under critically endangered, obviously, because they, if you don't care for that particular species, uh, uh, that species will go extinct for sure in coming few years. So firstly we will give priority to critically endangered, and then to endangered, and ultimately to the vulnerable one.
Okay, thank you. So
That's a very
the
good question. I should have mentioned in my slides during my talk, but I forgot actually.
next question is from Shoykot Paul. Which kind of plant species will be best for planting in South Bengal?
There is no such generalization, I must say, because see, the how the habitat will be and how what are the tree species in a particular habitat, that depends on the climate of that particular region. You all know from succession, climatic climax, we used to say, and depending on that climate, those particular tree species are adapted to that region. So we should have an idea what type of species grow in South Bengal and what type of species may grow in North Bengal. So depending on that knowledge, we should initiate replanting of the trees, because we can't plant any trees anywhere. That may be harmful, like invasive species, right? So we should have knowledge what type of tree should be planted in what type of region or climate. That's it.
Okay. Next question is from Rupam Devnath. So, what are the key points to identify a sacred grove or sacred lake? Is it relatable to traditional knowledges?
Uh, Key points to, there is no such key points to identify, and there is no such like national parks or sanctuaries. There are no such rules and regulations about such sacred groves. These are the old traditions maintained by the local villagers or local people from their belief, and they consider those regions as sacred, and they name that particular place in the name of some deities, and they respect that region, and due out of that respect they indirectly, you may say, conserving that particular area. So if you have a walk through forest, you will find that there are some stones with shindur, that is the sacred grove. And people actually scared of cutting those trees because for their belief. So such belief in God or deities is actually beneficial for the trees actually.
Okay. This is, I think, the last question from Priyanka Sengupta. So, how will climate change impact the three-dimensional distribution, abundance, and dispersal of marine species? And what are the implications?
I think I have mentioned in my slides that there are three ways that climate change may affect the marine environment. That is the as due to climate change, that I have not shown the graphs that average temperature of Earth is increasing day by day, and carbon dioxide concentration is also increasing day by day. There are graphs, but I have not shown due to time constraints. And due to this warmer climate and increase of carbon dioxide, and you all know that due to increase of carbon dioxide and other gases, acid rain occurs, and as due to acid rain, the acidity of the ocean increases, and that ultimately affect the fauna of marine environment, like thinning of shells, and there are lots of adverse effects of climate change on marine environment, and human influence against added to it, like plastics, plastic pollution in ocean. In these days, it is very common. You are listening everywhere that these all plastics are going to ocean, and it is actually affecting the biodiversity of marine environment, and that's how it everything rivers and all surface runoffs goes ultimately to the ocean, and the ocean receives all such কি বলবো, such byproducts of climate change, and that's why the effect is much more pronounced in case of ocean.
Okay, so we have two more questions coming in the YouTube feed. So one question is by Mrinmoy Pal. Is it a good idea to bring back extinct animals? Is it safe for nature?
That's also a very good ethical question, I think. See, when a particular animal becomes extinct, and if you bring back within short span of time, it is okay. I think, according to me, whatever ecological thoughts I have, because in that short time period, that surrounding environment have not changed much. But if you bring back an extinct animal which got extinct, say 20,000 years ago, or 1 lakh years ago, like dinosaurs, someone is bringing back those prehistoric animals again, I think that's gonna be a threat for other species, like invasive species, whatever I have mentioned, because that particular environment have changed a lot in these 20 or 30,000 years, and those animals is not properly adapted to the present environment, and they are going to, I think, they are going to harm the biodiversity and human being. Uh, so this is the main, what should I say, logic about bringing back those animals, that the time it matters. This is a very
Okay,
good question.
that's a nice answer. Interesting question. I think one last question is there. It's from Banra Plankton. So if human intervention is one of the many core factors which inhibit conservation of wildlife, then will the extinction of human species help in conservation of wildlife?
Pardon, please.
So if human intervention
Mhm.
is one of the core factors which inhibit conservation of wildlife, then will the extinction of human species help in the conservation of wildlife? So it's
Yes.
a debatable kind of question.
Yes, it is. I think a part of it already answered by Mr. Mitra. But as Mr. Mitra said that obviously we are conserving nature for our benefit. Eh? We are conserving because we know the consequences. Because if we don't care for nature, nature will not also care for us, right? So now say for some reason human race got extinct. And one thing I should mention that for every species on earth there is a rate which is called the uh, modifying the surrounding environment. Each and every species on earth modify their surrounding environment by various kind of interactions, right? In case of human, these changing or modifying the surrounding environment is the highest. Wherever we go, we change our surrounding environment. Now, like throwing plastics, throwing everything outside, and cutting trees, we are modifying our surrounding environment. And uh, as because this is the rate of this modification is highest in case of human being. So if human being got extinct, then obviously it is going to be beneficial for nature, because for other species that modification rate is not that much um, uh, high, and they are not technologically advanced like us. And whatever they do, the other animal or wildlife, that is all biological. Every interaction is biological for them. They don't harm um, um, nature much. So if we go extinct, obviously there will be again succession will occur in a broader sense, and Earth will be much more greener. So this is what if. Nice question.
Okay, so we have already overshot our time. So that brings us to the closing part of the webinar. So thank you, Dr. Pal, for a very lucid discussion session. So, so various participants have been asking about the feedback link. So I've provided feedback link in the YouTube comments. So it seems the hyperlink is not coming. So we will send you by email also the feedback link, so you'll be able to fill it up. So next, let us have the vote of thanks by our colleague, Dr. Shoma Aditya Bandyopadhyay.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible, Shoma.
Okay. Thank you, Aniruddha. So good evening, everyone. It gives me immense pleasure to propose the vote of thanks in this national webinar on exploring the different aspects of nature conservation, held on the occasion of World Nature Conservation Day, organized by the Department of Zoology and IQAC, Sarojini Naidu College for Women, Kolkata. At the outset, I would like to convey my heartfelt thanks to our eminent speakers, Sri Ogni Mitro and Dr. Shondeep Pal, for their enriching talks, valuable insights regarding wildlife conservation and wildlife crime, and interactive session with the participants. It was a really wonderful hearing from you. Thank you so much. On behalf of the Department of Zoology, I express my deepest gratitude to our principal ma'am, Dr. Urmila Ukil, for her encouragement and enormous cooperation in all our endeavors. We are thankful to Dr. Shantana Chakraborty, IQAC coordinator of our college, for being with us this evening. I would like to take this opportunity to extend my sincere thanks to the head of the Department of Zoology, Dr. Mala Bose, for kindly delivering the welcome address. My deep sense of appreciation goes to the organizers, Dr. Kabiri Dotto and Dr. Aniruddha Mitro, as well as other dedicated and motivated faculty members of our department for working very hard to make this webinar successful. I must also acknowledge the technical assistance provided by Tomokno Roy from the Computer Science Department, without whom this webinar wouldn't have been possible. Finally, I would like to thank all the participants, our colleagues from different colleges and universities, and our beloved students for making this webinar so interesting and engaging by their active participation. Thanks once again, and goodbye for now. Over to Aniruddha.
Okay, so we come to the end of our webinar then. So I formally announce the webinar as closed. So the feedback link has been provided by the person who was hosting the meeting also. So you will be able to click on that in the YouTube chat. We will provide you by email also the feedback link. So please try to submit your feedback by 10 p.m. tonight. After that, we will be sending you the participation certificates within a few days. So thank you all for attending. So have a nice evening and good night.